All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about one of America's most baffling, most chilling, unsolved cases. It's a story that has it all. A brutal murder, a completely fake identity, and this trail of just bizarre clues. Clues that have left investigators scratching their heads for, what, almost a century now?
So picture this. The year is 1935. We're right in the thick of the Great Depression in Kansas City, Missouri. And our story starts at the Hotel President, a really opulent, fancy place. You know, a beacon of luxury in tough times. But for one guest, well, this luxurious hotel was about to become the final, absolutely terrifying setting of his life.
Okay, so a hotel bellboy is sent up to room 1046. Why? Well, the guest inside hasn't been answering any calls from the front desk, and the phone's been off the hook for a while. On top of that, there's a Do Not Disturb sign that's been hanging on the doorknob for hours and hours. You can imagine, the staff is starting to get a little worried.
And what he finds when he opens that door, well, it's something that would turn into a full-blown American obsession. I'm serious. The scene was so brutal, so incredibly strange that it has puzzled everyone from seasoned investigators to armchair detectives like us ever since. This was not your typical crime scene. No, this was something else entirely. It felt like a meticulously staged mystery.
All right, Section 1, a bloody discovery. Let's see exactly what was waiting for them inside room 1046.
The scene inside was just horrific. The man is on his knees, his head is bloodied, there's blood on the bed, on the walls, even spattered on the ceiling. He's been bound, I'm talking cord around his neck, his wrists, his ankles. He'd been beaten so badly his skull was fractured and he had multiple stab wounds to his chest. It was a scene of absolute savage violence. And the most incredible part, he was still alive. Barely conscious, but alive.
So the police get there, and they ask him the obvious question, who did this to you? And his response, before he loses consciousness for good, is just baffling. He says, nobody, I fell and hit my head on the bathtub. I mean, come on, look at the evidence. A fractured skull, stab wounds, bound with cord. There is just no way these injuries were from a simple fall. The physical evidence told a completely different and much more violent story. Okay, so this brings us to the big question, right? Who was this man in room 1046? This mysterious guest who called himself Roland T. Owen. And what on earth happened in the 48 hours leading up to this horrific discovery? Because let me tell you, his behavior was strange from the second he walked through the hotel doors.
Let's look at this timeline, because it's just a masterclass in strange behavior. On January 2nd, Roland T. Owen checks in. He has no luggage, just a brush, a comb, and some toothpaste. That's it. He specifically asks for a dark interior room and tells a maid to leave it unlocked because a friend is coming. A few hours later, the maid finds him just lying on the bed in the dark, fully dressed. And there's this note on the table that says, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next day, he takes a call and is overheard saying, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry." Later that afternoon, the maid comes back and hears two men talking. A deep, gruff voice from inside tells her, "We don't need any towels." And then on the morning of the 4th, the phone's off the hook, a bellboy knocks, a voice says, "Come in," but the door is locked from the outside. You see how it just gets weirder and weirder? And who is this mysterious Dawn who seems to be calling the shots?
So you'd think the police investigation would start to clear things up, right? Wrong. It just made everything even more confusing. It was a total trail of dead ends.
I mean, look at this. The room was just full of contradictions. What did they find? A hairpin and a safety pin. 4 small fingerprints on the phone, believed to be a woman's. An unsmoked cigarette, and a full bottle of diluted sulfuric acid, of all things. But what was missing? Everything else. All his clothes and luggage, gone. The murder weapon, or weapons, gone. Even all the hotel soap and towels were missing. And of course, the victim's true identity. It's like the room was scrubbed clean of anything personal, but these few, bizarre, out-of-place clues were left behind. It's maddening.
And that name he gave, Roland T. Owen? Totally fake. The Los Angeles address he provided? Also fake. The man in room 1046 was basically a ghost. With no identity, no weapon, and no clear motive, the trail went cold almost instantly. So months go by, the body is still unidentified, they're getting ready to bury him in a pauper's grave, just another nameless victim of a violent crime. But just when you think the story is over, it takes another incredibly strange turn.
Right before the burial, the funeral home gets a phone call. It's an anonymous man, and he offers to pay for a proper funeral.
He's adamant that this man should not be buried in a pauper's grave. The funeral director is, understandably curious and asks him point blank, why was this man killed? And the caller's reply is just chilling.
He says cheaters usually get what's coming to them. He goes on to claim that the victim was mixed up with 2 different women and that this whole thing was arranged for revenge. And then he just hangs up. So what was that? Was it a confession? Or was it just more misdirection to throw everyone off the trail?
Sure enough, the money for the funeral arrives, sent in an unmarked envelope. Then, more money is sent, this time to a florist, for 13 American Beauty roses. But the card that came with the flowers, well, it just created another massive contradiction.
The card read, simply, "Love forever, Louise." So, which is it? Is this a brutal revenge killing like the anonymous guy on the phone said, or is it a crime of passion being mourned by this mysterious Louise? Every new piece of information just makes the case stranger.
Now, we jump forward over a year later. The case is cold, but then there's a breakthrough. A photo of the victim gets published, and thanks to a pretty distinctive scar on his head, the man is finally identified.
His name was Artemis Ogletree. He was just a 17-year-old kid from Alabama who'd left home to go hitchhiking. But when the police talked to his mother, Ruby, the case takes its most surreal turn yet. Seriously, if you thought it was weird before, just wait. Finding out his name didn't solve a thing. In fact, it just opened up a whole new can of worms.
So get this. His mother, Ruby, tells police she'd been getting messages from her son after he was already dead in Kansas City. She got a suspicious, typewritten letter in early 1935. Then 2 more in May from New York, claiming Artemis was sailing to Europe. And finally, a phone call in August from a man in Memphis. All of this happened months after he'd already been murdered.
And the story this caller told was just wild. He claimed Artemis was now living in Cairo, Egypt, married to a rich woman, but he couldn't write himself because, get this, he'd lost a thumb saving the caller's life. I mean, it's an elaborate and totally bizarre lie. Of course, there are no records of Artemis Ogletree ever going overseas. So the real questions are, who is sending these letters and making these calls, and why? Why go to all this trouble to convince his mother he was still alive?
And so, for nearly 100 years, we've been left with these unanswered questions. The few leads that did pop up over the years really amounted to nothing. There was a possible suspect, a guy named Donald Kelso, who was arrested for another murder, but he was never officially charged in this case. Still, that name, Donald, it's hard to ignore.
The case basically went ice cold for decades. But then, fast forward to the early 2000s, a local historian gets a very strange phone call. The caller says they were sorting through the belongings of someone who had recently passed away.
And they found a box. And inside this box was a bunch of newspaper clippings all about the murder of Artemis Ogletree. But there was one other thing in there with the clippings, something the caller said was mentioned over and over again in the news stories of the case. But they refused to say what it was.
So what was in the box? I mean, could it have been the murder weapon, the missing hotel towels, something personal that belonged to Artemis? That single tantalizing clue and the identity of the person who kept it hidden for decades is the final haunting question mark hanging over the incredible mystery of Room 1046.